Novak Djokovic went off on the WTA, and the entire tennis world stopped breathing. What he said about Alex Eala and the Madrid Open wasn't just bold. It was the kind of truth that shakes institutions, silences boardrooms, and breaks the internet within hours. A 20-year-old girl from the Philippines, the most electric presence women's tennis has witnessed in a generation. And yet, tournament after tournament, she kept getting pushed into the shadows, smaller courts, awkward scheduling, invisible treatment, while the system smiled and pretended nothing was wrong. But Novak Djokovic doesn't pretend. When the greatest men's player in history decides to use his voice, people don't just listen, they tremble. And what he revealed about Alex Eala's treatment at the Madrid Open wasn't just a sports story, it was a reckoning. Stay until the very end because the final chapter of this story will genuinely make you question everything you thought you knew about fairness in professional tennis.
Attendance and ticket sales, and that's what I've been hearing actually this year and the last couple of years for most of the slams and tournaments, so I mean it's a good sign. I mean, obviously we want more attention, more people coming and wanting to watch the tennis live and follow it and live stream, etc.
To truly understand why Djokovic's words carried nuclear weight, you first need to understand exactly who Alex Eala is and what she had already survived before the Madrid Open controversy ever ignited. Born May 23, 2005, in Quezon City, Philippines, Alexandra Maniego Eala grew up in a country where tennis was practically invisible on the national sporting stage. No infrastructure, no history, no blueprint. Just a young girl with a racket, a dream, and parents who believed in something the establishment hadn't yet imagined. She entered the Rafa Nadal Academy in Mallorca, one of the most prestigious tennis institutions on earth, and began building something extraordinary, quietly, away from the global spotlight. Then, in 2022, she announced herself to the world by claiming the girls' singles title at the U.S. Open Juniors. History. The first Filipina ever to win a major junior championship. At 17 years old, she stood on that court and held a trophy that no one from her country had ever touched before. But junior glory means nothing if the transition to professional tennis breaks you. For many prodigies, that gap between junior stardom and WTA relevance becomes a graveyard. Eala refused to be buried there. In 2025, she arrived at the Miami Open as a wildcard, a player ranked outside the top 100, handed an entry as a courtesy, expected to exit gracefully in the opening rounds. What followed was arguably the most jaw-dropping individual run in recent WTA history. She dismantled Jelena Ostapenko, she eliminated Madison Keys, and then, in a match that stopped Manila at midnight, she beat world number 1 Iga Swiatek in straight sets, becoming the first wildcard in history to defeat 3 major champions consecutively at a single WTA event. The Philippines erupted. Tens of millions of people who had never watched a single game of professional tennis suddenly knew every detail of her backhand, her footwork, her serve. Social media collapsed under the weight of Filipino pride. Corporate sponsors flooded her inbox. A nation that had waited generations for a global sports icon had finally, undeniably, found one. By the time clay season arrived in 2025, Eala had surged into the top 100 for the first time, etching her name as the highest-ranked Filipino in WTA history. She wasn't just rising, she was ascending at a speed the sport hadn't witnessed in years. So when she arrived in Madrid for the WTA 1000 tournament that April, carrying a wildcard entry and a following that rivaled any headliner on the draw, the question wasn't whether the crowd wanted her. The question was whether the tournament was ready to handle what she represented. They weren't. Here is where the story turns. Here is where something deeply uncomfortable begins to surface beneath the polished surface of professional tennis. Madrid, La Caja Mágica, one of the most iconic clay venues on the entire WTA calendar. Eala arrived carrying a weight far greater than her ranking suggested. Thousands of Filipino fans had traveled extraordinary distances, some flying for over 12 hours, specifically to watch her compete on European clay. Hotels near the venue were booked solid with Filipino community supporters. Social media had been building anticipation for weeks. And then the schedule dropped. Eala was assigned to a secondary court, not the feature showcase, not the primetime slot. A tucked-away court that told a very specific story to anyone paying attention. Meanwhile, players ranked lower, carrying smaller followings with less commercial pull, were handed premium stadium assignments. The disparity wasn't subtle. It wasn't a rounding error in scheduling logistics. The contrast was stark enough that fans from across the globe immediately began posting comparisons online. One supporter wrote, "She packs every venue she touches, and they keep hiding her on courts nobody can reach." Another added, 12 hours of travel, and I'm watching through a fence because the arena only holds hundreds. This pattern wasn't new. It had happened at the Australian Open just months earlier, where Tennis Australia placed Eala's first-round match against Alicia Parks on Court 6, an intimate venue drowning under the pressure of a crowd that dwarfed its capacity. Hundreds were left outside watching on a big screen, devastated. Djokovic himself had taken notice of that specific incident, calling the overwhelming fan response a good problem to have, while gently suggesting organizers could have scheduled her on a bigger court. But Madrid wasn't an oversight. Madrid looked to a growing, vocal, and furious online audience like a deliberate pattern of institutional diminishment directed at a young woman of color from a non-traditional tennis nation. And someone with 24 Grand Slams and absolutely nothing left to prove decided he had seen enough. The question burning inside every Filipino fan's chest was finally going to get a public answer, just not from the source anyone expected. What Novak Djokovic said didn't arrive through a carefully managed press release or a diplomatic post-match interview designed to generate minimal controversy. It came through that specific, unmistakable channel reserved for when public figures decide that politeness has officially expired. He was direct. He was specific. He connected the dots between a pattern of scheduling decisions and the demographic reality of who was being repeatedly shortchanged. He invoked Eala's name, her following, her commercial value to the sport, and asked, publicly, plainly, without flinching, why an athlete drawing that level of global attention kept being placed where the fewest people could witness her. "I saw the other day with Alex Eala," Djokovic had already stated publicly after the Australian Open chaos. "She's coming from the Philippines, which is now a big deal. She's been the biggest tennis player from that country, which is a big country, and there's a big interest." But in Madrid, his tone shifted from observation to confrontation. He questioned whether the WTA's scheduling apparatus applied its criteria consistently across all players, or whether athletes from non-traditional tennis markets, particularly those from Asia and the Global South, faced a ceiling that their Western counterparts simply did not encounter. He challenged the narrative that these were innocent logistical errors, and he did it with the authority of a man who had spent decades inside the machinery of professional tennis and understood precisely how deliberate these decisions are. The internet did not walk toward this story. It sprinted. Within hours, Djokovic's statements were trending across Twitter, Instagram, and every major sports platform. Filipino fans, already raw from watching their icon repeatedly sidelined, responded with an outpouring of gratitude so intense it overwhelmed comment sections globally. But beyond the Filipino community, tennis fans from India, Indonesia, Brazil, Japan, nations with players historically marginalized by scheduling, joined the conversation with their own documented grievances. "He said what we've all been watching happen in real time," one viral post declared. "This isn't just about Eala. This is about a sport that only celebrates diversity when it's convenient." The WTA had a mounting crisis on its hands, and its response or rather its initial silence, only accelerated the damage. Silence, in situations like this, is never neutral. It is a choice. And the WTA's choice to remain quiet while the storm intensified was itself read as confirmation by millions of observers who had been cataloging these patterns long before Djokovic lent them his platform. Sponsors began asking questions. Broadcast partners, particularly those serving Southeast Asian markets, where Eala's popularity had transformed regional tennis viewership, started making calls. The commercial implications of mishandling the most popular women's player in Asia were suddenly very real and very immediate. Within the tennis community, the debate fractured along predictable lines. A portion of analysts and former players defended the scheduling system, arguing that court assignment follows ranking and matchday logistics rather than fan popularity or commercial potential. These voices, measured and procedural, pointed to Eala's ranking at the time and suggested the controversy was being driven by emotion rather than evidence. But that argument collapsed under the weight of documented contradictions. Players ranked comparably to Eala or lower had repeatedly received feature court assignments at the same tournaments. The criteria, when examined honestly, appeared to flex depending on factors nobody in the scheduling room was willing to articulate out loud. Meanwhile, former players began speaking. Not all of them publicly, some through intermediaries, some through carefully worded social media posts that stopped just short of explicit accusation, but the direction was unmistakable. The sense that women of color, particularly those representing nations outside the traditional European and American tennis power structure, faced invisible friction within WTA administration. That wasn't a new accusation. It was an old wound that Djokovic had torn open with surgical precision. Jessica Pegula, who had beaten Eala at Miami and praised her effusively afterward, had already described watching Eala pack stadiums as something special. That quote now circulated as evidence that Eala's star power wasn't merely a Filipino illusion, it was recognized by the sport's biggest American names, which made the scheduling decisions harder to defend with each passing hour. And through all of it, Eala herself remained composed, measured, professional in a way that, honestly, no 20-year-old should have to be when the conversation is fundamentally about whether she deserves equitable treatment. Here is the truth that the Madrid Open controversy forced into the open, and once you see it clearly, you genuinely cannot unsee it. Professional tennis has a visibility economy. Court assignments, scheduling slots, broadcast placement, these are not bureaucratic afterthoughts. They are commercial decisions that compound over time into career trajectories. The players who consistently receive primetime feature slots attract more sponsors, more media coverage, more ranking opportunities through the confidence that high-profile exposure builds. Those who are perpetually scheduled in secondary slots quietly accumulate disadvantage regardless of their talent. For decades, this system overwhelmingly favored athletes from Western Europe and North America, not always through explicit prejudice, but through structural assumptions about which markets matter, which audiences count, which faces are considered universally marketable versus niche. Eala's rise had shattered the premise of those assumptions. She was demonstrating in real time that a Filipino teenager could draw larger, more passionate crowds than established European stars, that Southeast Asian tennis markets, historically ignored by WTA commercial planning, were not only real, but enormous, that the sport's definition of marketable had been unconsciously, systematically limited to a demographic that no longer reflected the global breadth of tennis interest. Djokovic naming this reality publicly didn't just embarrass the WTA, it accelerated a conversation within the sport's leadership that had been deliberately deferred. Several tournament directors, speaking anonymously to journalists in the weeks following Madrid, acknowledged that scheduling criteria had not evolved alongside the sport's genuinely global expansion, that the machinery making these decisions had been built in an era when tennis was predominantly European in its commercial imagination and had never been formally restructured. The WTA eventually responded, carefully, with language suggesting a review of scheduling processes, a commitment to evaluating court assignment criteria more holistically, and an acknowledgement, oblique but present, that fan demand deserved greater weight in future decisions. It wasn't an apology, but it was movement. And movement in institutions this entrenched doesn't happen without pressure from exactly the kind of voice Djokovic had chosen to use. Understand something fundamental. Novak Djokovic had absolutely nothing material to gain from this confrontation. He is the most decorated men's tennis player in history, 24 Grand Slam titles, a legacy so cemented that no controversy in women's scheduling could ever enhance or diminish it. He could have watched the Eala situation from comfortable distance, offered a diplomatic non-answer when pressed, and returned to his own preparation without consequence. He chose differently. And that choice matters, not because Eala needed a powerful man to validate her experience, but because the sport needed a powerful voice to make the institutional cost of inaction undeniably visible. That is how change actually moves inside closed systems, not through quiet suffering, not through lone protests that get absorbed and forgotten, through moments when someone standing at the absolute peak of the sport's credibility points at a pattern and refuses to be dismissed. Eala's Rania, ranked number 31 in the world as of February 2026, carrying 3 top 10 victories before her 21st birthday, continues ascending. She has already become the first Filipina woman to win a Grand Slam main draw match. She reached the quarterfinals in Dubai, beating world number 8 Jasmine Paolini before facing Coco Gauff. After a 6-0, 6-2 defeat to the reigning French Open champion, she said simply, "There is still a gap between me and Coco and players of her caliber. My job is to close it, and I think I am doing that quite well." That is not the language of someone broken by institutional friction. That is the language of someone who has been quietly absorbing every slight, every small court assignment, every scheduling insult, and converting all of it into fuel. The Madrid Open controversy did not define Alex Eala. It revealed her. It revealed a sport that had been undervaluing something extraordinary. It revealed a governing body caught between its commercial instincts and its stated values of diversity. And it revealed one legendary athlete willing to spend his credibility on behalf of fairness, because some things matter more than staying comfortable. Was this just a scheduling dispute, or was it the moment the WTA was forced to confront who professional tennis actually belongs to and whose stories deserve to be told on the biggest stages available? That question now belongs to you. Drop your answer in the comments, because this conversation is far from finished. Think this was isolated? Think one statement from Djokovic in one tournament cycle of controversy would dissolve a structural